In 2025, 315 American farms filed for bankruptcy. That's a 46% surge in just 1 year. And for one farmer named John Carter, the letter from the bank wasn't a statistic. It was an eviction notice for a family legacy. But 3 years earlier, on a night of howling wind, he made a decision that would rewrite that ending. John Carter was a third-generation dairy farmer in Wisconsin, fighting to keep 500 acres that had been in his family since 1948. But with milk prices collapsing and feed costs soaring, he was drowning in over $900,000 of debt. His story is the story of thousands. Yet his salvation would come from the most unexpected place, a stranger he once sheltered from a storm who vanished without a trace, until the day she walked back into his life with a shocking proposition. Storm hit on a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of violent gale that shreds tarps and sends shutters banging across the yard. John was securing the last of the equipment when his headlights swept across the figure at the end of his long gravel drive. She was just a silhouette against the horizontal rain, no car in sight, clutching a small duffel bag like it was the only thing holding her together. In rural communities, you help. It's an unwritten law. He didn't ask many questions. He led the shivering woman, who said her name was Alina, into the warm chaos of his farmhouse kitchen, where a pot of stew simmered on the stove. She was in her late 20s with an exhausted grace. Over a simple meal, she shared fragments of a story, a bus ticket to a city that didn't work out, a promised job that vanished, a wallet stolen at a roadside stop. She spoke softly, avoiding specifics, her gratitude palpable. John offered the old couch in the den. As the wind rattled the windows, he told her about the farm. Not the debt, not the desperation, but the good parts. The way the morning sun hit the silos, the history in the soil. It was a monologue of pride masking a deep, quiet fear. She listened intently, and before turning in, she said something odd. "This place is a sanctuary. It shouldn't be allowed to disappear." The next morning, she was gone. The couch was neatly made. A thank you note was left on the kitchen table, written on the back of a feed receipt. It read simply, "Your kindness is a seed. It will grow." John tucked the note into a drawer, a minor mystery in a day already overflowing with major crises. The bank had called that afternoon, the first formal warning. What followed were 3 of the hardest years of John Carter's life. He fought with every tool he had. He diversified, trying a small pumpkin patch for autumn tourists. He took on custom hay baling for neighbors, working 18-hour days. He sold off parcels of timberland his grandfather had planted, each signature on the deed feeling like a betrayal. But he was running in quicksand. The systemic pressures were too great. Milk prices kept falling. The cost of fertilizer, diesel, and equipment repairs kept climbing. His operating loan from the Farm Credit Services was renewed annually, but each time the principal was larger, the terms tighter. He was, as the grim agricultural term goes, asset-rich and cash-poor. The land was valuable, but the money to work it was gone. The psychological toll was invisible but profound. Sleep became elusive. The isolation of the farm, once a comfort, became a prison. He watched as other farms in the county went dark. The Miller place down the road sold to a large corporate operation. The Forge family auctioned off everything and moved to Texas. A quiet grief settled over the community. This was the generational downturn experts had warned about, the one that echoed the crisis of the 1980s. Back then, interest rates had soared to 21.5%. Now, it wasn't just interest rates. It was a perfect storm of global markets, consolidation, and a relentless cost-price squeeze that pushed once viable operations over the edge. John's breaking point was a spreadsheet. Sitting at his cluttered desk in February, he finally crunched the numbers he'd been avoiding. To break even that year, he needed milk prices to jump by 30%, while every forecast predicted they would fall further. The $900,000 debt was a mountain. The equity in his land was his only shield, and the bank was starting to eye it. The letter that arrived in March wasn't a warning. It was a notice of foreclosure proceedings to be initiated in 90 days if the arrears weren't cleared. It was a death sentence for Carter Family Dairy. He was standing in that same kitchen, the letter trembling in his hand, staring out at the barns his great-grandfather had raised, when he saw a sleek, unfamiliar car rolling slowly up his drive. It wasn't a banker's sedan. It was a luxury vehicle, dust kicking up behind its polished wheels. He watched, confused, as it came to a stop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman. It was Elena, but she was transformed. The worn jeans and damp jacket were gone. She wore a tailored cream-colored blazer, her dark hair styled and shining. She looked poised, successful, utterly out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and weedy yards. She met his stunned gaze from across the fence, a gentle, confident smile on her face. 3 years had passed without a word, and now, on the worst day of his life, she had returned. For a long moment, John just stared, the foreclosure notice crumpling in his fist. The woman from the storm was a ghost from a simpler time, a fleeting memory of kindness before the slow collapse. Now she stood before him as a mirage of everything he'd lost: stability, success, hope. "Elena," he finally managed, his voice rough. "Hello, John," she said, her smile warm but edged with the gravity of the moment. She glanced past him at the worn farmhouse. "I see the storm's past, but I think a bigger one moved in." He invited her inside, the absurdity of the situation making him numb. In his kitchen, she didn't sit. She stood by the table, her eyes taking in the piles of unpaid bills, the spreadsheets, the tangible aura of defeat. She got straight to the point. "I heard about the trouble, the potential foreclosure." She said the word carefully, as if it were a live wire. John felt a surge of defensive anger. "Heard from who? The whole county? Is that why you're here? To get a look at the car wreck before they tow it away?" The bitterness shocked him, but it had been festering for years. Elena didn't flinch. "A mutual friend at the feed co-op. He thought I should know." She paused. "I'm here because I want to make you an offer, John, a business proposal." He laughed, a hollow, tired sound. "What could you possibly propose? A job? I'm a 50-year-old farmer. My resume is dirt and debt." "I want to buy the farm," she said, her voice clear and steady. The words hung in the air, a final, confirming blow. So she was just another vulture after all. A prettier one with a nicer car, but a vulture nonetheless. The last flicker of strange hope died in his chest. "Right," he said, turning away. "Join the queue. The bank's first in line. They'll sell it to some investment group who'll strip it for parts. You can bid against them." "You're not listening," she said, her tone shifting to one of gentle command. "I don't want to buy it from the bank after they've taken it. I want to buy it from you now, today. I will pay off every cent of the $900,000 debt. I will clear the arrears. I will satisfy the lien." John turned back, utterly confused. "Why, to flip it, to build a subdivision? This isn't that kind of land." "No," she said, shaking her head. "To give it back to you." The room seemed to tilt. He had to lean against the counter. "What are you talking about?" Elena took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to tell a story she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. 3 years ago, I wasn't just down on my luck. I was running from a bad relationship, from a life that had shrunk to nothing. That night, your farm wasn't just shelter from the rain. It was the first act of pure, no-strings-attached kindness I'd experienced in years. You told me about this land, about the history. You talked about it like it was a member of your family. You had no idea who I was, but you shared your food, your fire, your peace. That note I left, your kindness is a seed. I meant it. It planted something in me." She explained that with the last of her money, she'd made it to Chicago. She took a job as a server, then a manager, at a high-end restaurant that sourced local, organic produce. She saw the markup, saw the demand from urban consumers for an authentic story, for a direct connection to the land. She saw the missing link between struggling farms and lucrative markets. With a ferocious work ethic born of desperation and a new sense of purpose, she spent 2 years learning everything: e-commerce, digital marketing, supply chain logistics. She used a small business loan to start a direct-to-consumer online platform called Root Source. It wasn't just another grocery delivery service. It partnered with small, sustainable farms like John, telling their stories, selling their products at a fair price, and cutting out the middlemen that sucked the profit from producers. "That seed you planted," she said, her eyes glistening, "it grew into a company. Last quarter, our valuation hit $12 million. We have 17 farm partners across 3 states, and we need a flagship, a home base, a story that's real." John's mind was reeling, trying to connect the shivering woman in his den with the poised CEO in his kitchen. "So you're a agri-tech mogul now, and you want my farm as a showpiece." "I want it as the heart of the operation," she corrected. "I buy the land and the assets, the debt vanishes, you become my head of production, you run the dairy, you manage the land, you implement the sustainable practices we market. You get a salary, benefits, and a 10% equity stake in the entire enterprise. The Carter name stays on the farm. It becomes Carter Family Dairy, a root source partner. Your legacy isn't erased, it's amplified, it's saved." The offer was so vast, so alien, it felt like a trap. There had to be a catch. This was the kind of deal City people offered before they took everything. "Why me?" he asked, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "You could buy any farm, why come back here?" Elena's confident demeanor softened. "Because the kindness was here, the debt is here, and because," she hesitated, choosing her words, "because I know what it's like to have your future taken from you. I got a second chance. This is my way of honoring that. This isn't charity, John. It's a strategic investment in a proven farmer and a powerful story. But for me, it's also a circle closing." She reached into her blazer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A term sheet outlining the deal in clear language, purchase price to cover all debts, his employment contract, the equity stake. It was real. John's hands trembled as he took it. This was the lifeline, thrown at the exact moment he was going under. It was everything he needed, and that's what terrified him. Accepting it meant admitting he couldn't save it himself. It meant handing over the deed his grandfather had signed. It meant working for the woman he'd once given a cooch. The pride that had kept him going for 3 hard years now screamed at him to refuse. But the sight of his wife's photograph on the windowsill, the thought of the generations of Carters who had worked this soil, the crushing weight of the debt, it all warred inside him. He was silent for a full minute, the clock on the wall ticking loudly toward his ruin. "I need to think," he whispered. "You have 48 hours, Elena said gently but firmly. "The bank's 90-day clock is ticking. For this to work, we need to move fast to stop the proceedings. I'm staying at the inn on Main. Bring me your answer by Friday morning." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "John, that night you told me this land has a soul. I believed you. Don't let its soul get auctioned off to the highest bidder." He spent the night in a vortex of panic and hope. He called his old friend, a retired agricultural lawyer named Ben, and read him the terms over the phone. Ben was silent for a long time. "John," he finally said, "on paper it's the deal of a lifetime. It saves your skin, but it's not paper you're signing, it's your life. You need to know who this woman really is. A valuation can be fudged. A startup can be a house of cards." The doubt took root. What if Root Source failed? He'd be an employee on land he used to own, watching another dream die. What if this was an elaborate scheme? He lay awake, the term sheet glowing in the moonlight on his bedside table. The next morning, driven by Ben's warning, he did something he felt guilty about. He went to the library in town and used the public computers to dig deeper. He found Root Source's sleek website, glowing press in foodie magazines, positive reviews. It looked legitimate. But then, in the comments section of an old business blog, he found a buried thread. A former employee, anonymous, complained about Elena's ruthless drive in the early days, about a supplier partnership that ended in a bitter legal dispute that was settled out of court. The words used were ambitious and relentless. The woman who spoke of kindness and circles had another side. A fighter, a survivor, was that the person he was about to trust with his family's history. The tension was no longer just about debt. It was about trust. It was about handing over the reins of his shattered kingdom to a mysterious queen who had appeared from the fog of a storm. He drove to the inn on Main Friday morning, the term sheet on the passenger seat. His heart was a drum. He was going to say yes. He had to. But as he pulled into the parking lot, he saw Elena standing outside, not alone. She was in a heated discussion with a tall, stern-faced man in an expensive overcoat. John recognized him instantly. It was Lawrence Coulter, the largest real estate developer in the region, a man notorious for buying distressed farmland and converting it into sprawling suburban lots. Coulter was waving a folder, his expression one of smug frustration. Elena was shaking her head, her posture rigid, dismissing him. Coulter climbed into a black Mercedes and sped away. Elena watched him go, then smoothed her blazer, a look of cold satisfaction on her face. She hadn't seen John yet. In that unguarded moment, he didn't see the grateful survivor or the benevolent savior. He saw a strategist, a player in a game he didn't understand. Why was a developer talking to her about his farm? He sat in his truck, the engine off, the decision he'd almost made now frozen in his throat. The offer was real, the salvation was real, but the circle, he realized with a sinking dread, might be far more complicated and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. John watched the developer's car disappear, the image of Alina's satisfied expression burning in his mind. This wasn't just about a farm anymore, it was about a piece on a board he couldn't see. He took a deep breath, grabbed the term sheet, and got out of the truck. Alina's mask of command slipped back into place as she saw him approach, replaced by a look of expectant hope. "John, I'm glad you came." He didn't return the smile, he held up the paper. "I was ready to sign this, then I saw you with Lawrence Coulter. What was that?" A flicker of surprise, then understanding, crossed her face. She nodded slowly. "Come inside, please." In the quiet-in lobby, over coffee, she laid out a new layer of the game. "Coulter didn't come to see me, he was waiting for me. He's been assembling a contiguous 1,200-acre parcel for a year, buying up foreclosed farms. Your 500 acres is the final, crucial piece in the center. He needs it to make his Heritage Meadows subdivision viable. He offered me a 50% premium over your debt to walk away and let him have it." John felt cold, "And you said no." "I told him the farm wasn't for sale to him, at any price." She leaned forward. "John, that's the reality you're in. You're not just fighting the bank. You're standing in the way of a $20 million land deal. Do you think the bank doesn't know that? Do you think Coulter hasn't already encouraged them to be firm with you?" The conspiracy felt both outrageous and perfectly logical. It explained the bank's sudden, unyielding hardness. His farm wasn't a failure, it was a target. Alina's offer wasn't just salvation, it was a blockade. "So I'm a pawn," he muttered. "No," she said fiercely. "You're the king, and you have a move. You sell to me, the debt is gone, the land is preserved as a working farm, and Coulter's whole project collapses. My offer is a shield, but you have to decide now. Coulter just left here angry. He's going to the bank with a bigger number. Your 90 days could become 90 hours." The pressure was a physical weight. Trust the mysterious woman fighting a developer, or risk becoming the reason a dozen other farm families lost everything to subdivisions. He signed the term sheet. It was an agreement to proceed, not a final sale. Alina's relief was visible. "We move fast," she said. "My lawyers will draft the full purchase agreement. We'll need a land survey, a full asset audit. We can close in 30 days. But the world, it seemed, moved faster. The very next day, John received a call from his loan officer at the bank. The tone was different, not bureaucratic, but almost apologetic. "John, there's been a complication. A higher value offer has been made for the property, contingent on a swift foreclosure. The review committee is, well, they're interested. It could accelerate things." Coulter's counterpunch. John, panicking, called Alina. Her voice was tight. "He's calling in favors. We need to go public. We need to make your farm too visible to steal." What followed was a whirlwind. A root source media team descended on the farm. They filmed John with his cows, in his fields, telling his family's story. They interviewed Alina about her mission to save the soul of American farming. The story, crafted for maximum emotional impact, was released online. The farmer who sheltered a stranger and the life-altering debt she returned to erase. It went viral in agricultural circles and beyond. The narrative was perfect. Kindness repaid, corporate greed thwarted, legacy preserved. Donations flooded a linked fund to save Carter Farm. Local news picked it up. Suddenly, John was a symbol, and symbols have enemies. The backlash was swift and ugly. Anonymous comments on farming forums accused him of being a sellout, of peddling a sob story to hide his poor management. "Real farmers don't need fairy godmothers from the city," one read. A neighboring farmer, an old friend named Hank, stopped returning his calls. The isolation he'd felt from debt was now compounded by a new kind of judgment. Worse was the legal grenade that arrived a week later. A formal notice from a law firm representing a group called Midwest Agricultural Preservation. They were challenging the sale to Root Source on the grounds of predatory conversion of agricultural land for commercial branding purposes. The filing argued that Elena's plan to use the farm as a marketing hub and experiential destination violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the county's agricultural zoning. The group was a shell, but its funding, John's lawyer Ben discovered, traced back to a network of real estate interests. Coulter was fighting dirty. The sale was now frozen in legal limbo. The bank-accelerated foreclosure was paused, but so was his lifeline. He was stuck in purgatory, the public eye a blinding, hostile spotlight. In the midst of this, Elena asked to walk the back 40 acres, the wooded parcel his grandfather had loved. They walked in silence for a while, the tension between them palpable. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice quiet. "I didn't mean for it to get this toxic. I thought I was just buying a farm." "You are," John said, "but you're also buying a war, and I'm the battlefield." She stopped, turning to face him. The CEO veneer was gone. She looked like the tired woman from the storm again. "John, you asked why I really came back. It wasn't just the kindness. That night, I was pregnant." The words hung in the cool air. John stared, speechless. "I left because I was scared and had nothing. I had the baby in Chicago, a little girl, Sophia." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Building Root Source, it wasn't just for me. It was for her, to build something she could be proud of, something with roots, something good. This farm, when I thought of a place with a soul, a place I'd want her to know, I thought of here. I'm not trying to be your savior. I'm trying to build a sanctuary. For my daughter, for your legacy, for all of it." This was the human core beneath the business plan, the final, disarming revelation. His suspicion melted into a profound, shared understanding. They were both fighting for a future, for the next generation. They were on the same side. But the forces against them were converging. 2 days later, Hank, the neighbor who'd been avoiding him, showed up at John's door, his face grim. "We need to talk, John. It's about your partner." Hank revealed that a Coulter Holdings representative had been making the rounds, offering cash payments to neighboring farmers for easements and rights of way. The real play wasn't just to buy John's farm anymore. It was to besiege it. If Coulter couldn't get the land, he would make it impossible to farm, blocking access, complicating drainage, using legal maneuvers to strangle the operation until it failed, and John had no choice but to sell. Elena's shield wasn't enough. They were being outflanked. The war had moved to the borders of his kingdom. That night, John sat at his kitchen table, the walls closing in. The bank, the developer, the lawyers, the jealous neighbors, the viral fame, it was a hydra. Cutting off one head made two grow back. Signing with Elena had started the fire. Backing out now would leave him in ashes. His lawyer Ben's words echoed, "Sometimes, John, to win a war, you can't just defend your castle, you have to rally the countryside." He looked out at the dark fields, then at the list of neighboring farms Hank had given him, the ones being pressured by Coulter. A desperate, dangerous idea began to form. Elena had offered to save one farm, but what if the answer wasn't saving one farm, but saving them all? What if he turned her deal not into a shield, but into a weapon? He picked up the phone and called Elena. "The game has changed," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "We need a new plan. I'm not just selling you my farm. We're going to use it to build a fortress, and we're going to invite everyone who's about to be wiped off the map to come inside." Elena listened to John's desperate, radical idea in silence. When he finished, she didn't speak for a full minute. Then a slow, determined smile spread across her face. "You're not building a fortress, John," she said. "You're starting a revolution." They worked through the night. The new plan was audacious. They wouldn't just use the viral story to defend one farm. They would weaponize it. The following morning, John and Elena called a meeting at the town's community hall. They invited every farmer on Hank's list, every neighbor who'd received an offer from Coulter's people. The room was tense, thick with suspicion and despair. John stood before them, not as a failing farmer, but as a man with nothing left to lose. He laid it all bare: the debt, the foreclosure, Elena's offer, Coulter's land grab, the legal sabotage. "They're picking us off one by one because we're alone," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet hall. "But what if we stopped being alone?" Elena then took the floor. She unveiled a new proposal, a cooperative model built on the Root Source platform. They would form the Carter Valley Agricultural Collective. RootSource would provide the capital to buy out the immediate, crushing debts of the 5 most vulnerable farms, including John's. In return, those farms would become equity partners in the collective, not just suppliers. They would pool their land, their equipment, their labor, and their stories. RootSource would market them as a unified brand, the last stand of the family farm. It was a gamble of monumental scale. It required trust where none existed. But John, by putting his own farm and his mysterious benefactor on the line first, made himself the guinea pig, the first to risk everything. Hank, after a long, hard stare, was the first to stand up. "I'm in. They've been at my door too." One by one, others followed. A pact was made. The legal and public relations battle that followed was a masterclass in modern warfare. Elena's lawyers filed a countersuit against the Shell organization, demanding to uncover its funding sources, a move that made Coulter's lawyers suddenly very eager to settle. The media narrative pivoted from one farm saved to community fights back against corporate land grab. News crews descended again, this time filming the united front of multi-generational farmers standing shoulder to shoulder. Public pressure became a tsunami. Donations to the fund skyrocketed, now earmarked for the legal defense of the entire collective. Local politicians, sensing the powerful populist sentiment, began making statements about preserving agricultural heritage. The bank, facing a public relations nightmare and a now complicated web of ownership, blinked. They agreed to a freeze on all foreclosure proceedings against collective members pending the outcome of a community impact review. Coulter's empire of pressure began to crack. His anonymous funding for legal challenges dried up. His offers to neighbors were withdrawn. The value of his assembled parcels plummeted without John's central acreage. He had lost the war of perception, and with it, the financial viability of his project. 6 weeks after that meeting in the community hall, John Carter sat in a lawyer's office and signed the final papers. RootSource purchased Carter Family Dairy. The $900,000 debt vanished from the ledger in the stroke of a pen. But he also signed a second set of papers, making him a founding partner and head of operations of the Carter Valley Agricultural Collective. He was an employee and an owner. The land was no longer solely his, but its future and the future of his neighbors was secured. The first harvest under the new model was that autumn. It wasn't just milk. It was honey from Hank's apiaries, organic pumpkins from the Fields family, artisanal cheese from the converted Carter barn, all sold under the collective brand on the RootSource site. The story sold as much as the product. Customers weren't just buying food, they were buying a piece of a victory. On a crisp October day, a familiar black Mercedes rolled up the drive. Lawrence Coulter got out alone. He approached John, who was repairing a fence. Coulter looked older, deflated. "You win, Carter," he said simply. "My board is pulling the plug on Heritage Meadows. The land bank is being dissolved. I'm here to make an offer for your collective's surplus hay, for my remaining equestrian properties." It was the ultimate surrender. The predator was now a customer. John, feeling a calm he hadn't known in years, nodded and shook his hand. It was just business. The final surprise came a month later. Elena brought her daughter, Sophia, now a vibrant 3-year-old, to the farm for the first time. The little girl, with Elena's eyes, took to the open space instantly, chasing kittens in the barn. As John watched them, Elena handed him a small, faded notebook. "I found this going through my things from Chicago. I kept a journal that year, the night of the storm." John opened it to the marked page. The entry was dated that rainy October night. In smudged ink, Elena had written, "Met an angel tonight, a tired man in a warm kitchen who talked about land with more love than any person I've ever known. He has no idea he just saved 2 lives, mine and the little one growing inside me. If I ever find solid ground, I will find a way to return this peace. I will buy that man's peace and protect it forever." John looked up, his eyes wet. Elena smiled through her own tears. "The seed, John, it grew." The story of Carter Family Dairy didn't end with a rescue. It began with one. The farm, debt-free and buzzing with new life, became the beating heart of a community that had chosen solidarity over surrender. John Carter still woke before dawn. He still worked the land his grandfather gave him. But the crushing weight was gone, replaced by the lighter, more formidable burden of stewardship, of land, of legacy, and of the fragile hope of an entire valley. The viral tale had promised a miracle, a stranger returning to wipe away a debt, but the real miracle was subtler. It was the discovery that the only true antidote to extinction is not a lone savior, but a renewed community. The kindness offered on a stormy night had indeed been a seed, but it didn't just grow into a company or a salvation deal, it grew into a forest. In an era defined by 315 farm bankruptcies in a single year, the story of Carter Family Dairy stands as more than a feel-good headline. It is a blueprint, a testament to a radical idea we so often forget in our age of isolation, that our survival is not an individual sport. We began with a storm, a stranger, and a crushing debt. We end with a forest where a single tree was saved. The lesson is that a magical benefactor will appear for every struggling farmer. The lesson is that the seeds of our own redemption are often sown in the simplest acts of human connection. John Carter offered shelter without expectation. That single, uncalculated moment of grace became the root system of an entire ecosystem of survival. The systemic forces that push farms to the brink, the record debt, the consolidation, the policy choices that favor scale over soul, they haven't vanished. But this story proves they are not invincible. They can be outmaneuvered not just by capital, but by community, by a story powerful enough to rally it. The true currency that saved Carter Farm was Elena's millions. It was the collective trust she and John managed to forge from the raw material of shared desperation. Oh, what lingers after the final signature dries? It's the question of where our own seeds are planted. In a world that often feels fractured, where do we invest our small kindnesses, our moments of trust? John and Elena's story whispers that these are not minor transactions. They are the quiet, strategic investments in a future we cannot yet see. We are all planting in a storm, not knowing what will grow. But the history of human resilience suggests that something almost always does. The miracle we wait for is rarely a thunderclap. It is the slow, gathering strength of things that have been nurtured in the dark, a friendship, a promise, a shared purpose. It is the network of roots that finally makes the ground firm enough to stand upon. If this story resonated with you, consider what it plants in your own life. Share it with someone who needs to remember that no one is meant to fight their storm alone. For more documentaries that explore the hidden forces shaping our world and the quiet heroes who defy them, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us find and tell these vital stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most important harvests begin with the seeds we choose to sow today.